2018 wasn't quite as great a year for games as the past few have been, but between remastered classics, hugely ambitious AAA titles, and genre-blending indie games, there were still plenty of amazing experiences well worth celebrating. I put together a top 10 list for 2016, and I actually had one in the works for 2017, but real life was far too hectic at the time for me to actually produce a video. Here's that list now if you're interested. This year I was initially working on another top 10, but I've decided to go a different route. I want to talk a bit more broadly about the experiences I've had with games this year, so there will be 3 parts to this video: disappointments, honorable mentions, and my top 5 favorite games of 2018. We'll start with the disappointing games. I want to be clear, disappointments are just that, disappointing. They aren't necessarily bad games, in fact, some of them are critically lauded for good reasons. But they're on this list because my overall impression, for one reason or another, was one of disappointment. Alright, here we go. I knew Far Cry 5 had a lousy story and didn't bring much innovation to the series on the gameplay side of things, but I still picked it up because I generally have a good time with Far Cry games. But now, after 5 core Far Cry titles, I'm ready to declare that the even-numbered games are the good ones. I think it's mostly story and context that separates the good and bad Far Cry entries. Since 3, they've all played more or less the same. Far Cry 2 and 4 aren't the best stories in video games, but at least it feels like they were trying. Far Cry 3 and 5 both have insufferable storylines and characters, but at least Far Cry 3 was having some fun. Far Cry 5 is set in America and has a storyline based around a militia of religious fanatics. If you think that sounds like a setup for exploring the socio-political climate in America, I'd agree with you. But the game doesn't do that at all. The game is aware of controversial hot-button issues, it gestures in their general direction, but says nothing about them, which is the very definition of pretension. It's not that I wanted a highly political Far Cry game, I very much don't. Ubisoft has never, ever, 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 ever been good at handling real-world political and social issues in their games, and they're not even particularly good at writing basic narratives. They excel at making sandbox worlds full of fun stuff to do, and that's about all I was asking from Far Cry 5. But the game constantly pushed me away with its completely insufferable villains, who capture you multiple times throughout the story so they can monologue you to death. It's so boring. These are terrible characters, all of them. It's terrible writing. It feels so pointless and hollow. Far Cry 5 is a dull, disappointing, and baffling game, and somehow, inexplicably, if my silly theory is correct, Far Cry 6 will probably be pretty good. I am so torn about God of War. I realize for many people, this is Game of the Year material, and to be clear, it is an extremely well-made game, but that didn't keep it from being personally disappointing to me. I've never played the older games, but I was really excited to try this one. I'd heard so many good things about how it reinvented the series and told an amazing story. I'm sure the first part is true, but I'm not sold on the second. Mostly, I think the game just didn't give me what I wanted out of the premise, what I thought it was promising me. There's this amazing fight in the first hour of the game where you just have the most brutal, destructive brawl I've ever seen in a game of this visual fidelity, and it feels amazing. Like, this is absolutely the sort of thing that should happen in a game starring mythological gods. Unfortunately, these kind of wow moments are few and far between. It feels like most of the world is asleep, and you're only stumbling on the least interesting bits of it. I would have been much more satisfied if so much of the gameplay hadn't felt so thoroughly conventional. Apart from the presentation, which is top-notch, it feels like it could have been made any time in the last 10 years. The combat, exploration, and puzzle-solving elements are fairly pedestrian in their design. Norse mythology offers so much potential, and God of War seems like it's holding back the good stuff for the sequels, which is understandable, but still disappointing. In the meantime, they try to tide us over with a parent-child story that's clearly inspired by games like The Last of Us or Telltale's Walking Dead, but it's not nearly as engaging as either of them. The mythological elements are interesting, but they're largely relegated to the background, while one-note Kratos and his boring son take center stage. It's not a bad story by any means, it just isn't very impactful or exciting, and it should be. But they have my interest for the sequels now. So mission accomplished, I guess. I know this isn't a game, but I feel like I have to talk about it all the same. After nearly a year and a half of waiting, Nintendo finally launched their online service for the Switch, and it is even more underwhelming than I expected. Nintendo Switch Online's main feature is, of course, the ability to play games online, something that was free until the service launched. It also gives you access to a handful of ancient NES games and cloud backup of game saves. It's only $20 a year, much less than Xbox Live Gold or PlayStation Plus, but it still seems like a bad deal. After all this time waiting for the service to launch, it was delayed about a year in total, I expected Nintendo to really have something more. But no. While having access to some classic NES games is novel, it's hardly a consolation for the legions of fans who have been waiting for a larger back catalog of Nintendo's games on the Switch, like previous systems had. Even the 3DS has Super Nintendo games. The cloud save feature is both the best and worst part of the whole affair. It's basically essential to back up your save data on a portable console, which is at risk of being lost, stolen, or broken in normal usage. But this is the only way to do that. You can't back up save data manually, despite that being a standard feature of every other console. That's not quite extortion, but it's too close for comfort. I said in my Switch review a year and a half ago that the operating system felt unfinished, and I was hoping that Nintendo would add in missing features by the time the online service rolled out. And despite the year-long delay, there have been almost no updates to the Switch in terms of system functionality. The online service is too little, too late, and the Switch deserves better. It's a good console that could be a great one if Nintendo would get with the times, but they're still lagging behind by years. Nintendo, please understand. I critique because I care. Please get it together. Is it unfair of me to complain about a game I didn't play at all? Probably, but I'm going to do it anyway. Fallout 3 and New Vegas are some of my favorite games ever, but Fallout 4 was disappointing. It lacked a lot of the interesting questlines and small stories that those other games were packed with. Combat and looting was emphasized while role-playing was downplayed. In the end, Fallout 4 just felt kind of empty. So here we have Fallout 76, a game that doubles down on a lot of the decisions made in Fallout 4. It strips away even more of the RPG roots and is a technical and artistic mess on top of that. The vast majority of people who have played it said that it's a big, empty, buggy, boring game, and I believe them. I get why Bethesda tried this experiment. Multiplayer Fallout or Elder Scrolls has been something fans have wanted for a long time, but this implementation leaves a lot to be desired. I would probably have fun exploring the map, but ultimately I know I'm only going to find old, empty buildings, audio logs, and legions of enemies to clumsily shoot in the general direction of. Fallout 76 looks like a game that emphasizes Bethesda's weaknesses and is almost entirely void of its strengths. A truly baffling project that displays an extreme lack of self-awareness. Honestly though, I think this might be a good thing in the long run. Bethesda needed a wake-up call, and hopefully the poor sales and abysmal reviews will force them to address long-standing issues, and make Starfield, Elder Scrolls 6, and Fallout 5 much better games. Hopefully. Red Dead Redemption 2 was on my top 5 list until semi-recently. It didn't get bumped off because another game took its place necessarily, but rather as I reflected on my experience with the game, I couldn't help but deem it a profoundly disappointing one. I say that genuinely, and not to be some kind of internet contrarian hipster. I wanted to finally love a Rockstar game, but I just couldn't. Rockstar makes the kind of games that are impressive in ways that I don't much care about. Like, it's neat that there's all this detail and animation, and they're really going boldly for a slow-paced game in an age where nobody can go more than 10 minutes without looking at their phone. But does all that make it fun and engaging? Sometimes, but not enough. On the one hand, Rockstar is passionate about making grand linear narratives with incredible production value, like a Hollywood movie. And on the other, they love making open-world games where the ostensible appeal is that you can go anywhere and do anything. These two designs pull very hard in opposite directions. While I loved much of my time with the main story, the pacing totally fell apart by the end. It desperately needed an editor to rein things in. It's not like the game would have been lacking for content if the storyline had been a few hours shorter. If Red Dead Redemption 2 had been in the form of a Naughty Dog game, a highly linear game to go with a highly linear story, but still possessing top-notch production values, I think I might have loved it. Certainly it would lose something without the open world, but I think it would also gain a stronger sense of cohesion, pacing, and tonal consistency. As it is, the open world mechanics feel constrained by the demands of the linear story, and the linear story feels bloated by the expectations of the open world. Ultimately, Red Dead Redemption 2 has a lot of the same issues that I had with the first game and Grand Theft Auto 5. I didn't enjoy playing either of them very much, despite the clear ambition demonstrated. Last year, The Legend of Zelda experienced a renaissance as an open-world game, and it felt really fresh and new. A lot of franchises, developers, and genres are in a place that warrants the same kind of reinvention as Breath of the Wild. Bethesda is in that place, and I think Rockstar is there as well, at least artistically. They have no reason to reinvent themselves with sales like they've been seeing. For me, the tragedy is that parts of Red Dead Redemption 2 are among the best I've experienced in games. There's some great writing, voice acting, and character development, and that's coming from someone who considers the first game to be massively overrated in those regards. No matter how much money and time you put into a project, and both are on explicit display in Red Dead 2, you can never guarantee an emotional connection with the player. But it was there, and it was strong, and that's something I really value. What Red Dead Redemption 2 does perhaps better than any other game I've played is establish an ensemble cast that really does come to feel like a family. That's not easy to do with flesh and blood actors. The fact that Rockstar pulls this off with fake computer people is perhaps its most impressive trick. I also grew very fond of protagonist Arthur Morgan, who I like far, far better than John Marston of the first game. Without spoiling anything, I'll reiterate that the story and characters produced some really profound emotions in me while playing. I just hope that Rockstar can improve the game part of their video games in the future. Now for my honorable mentions. Games I liked, but aren't quite the cream of the crop, or I didn't play enough to fully evaluate. So I don't play a lot of driving games, especially ones closer to the simulation side of the spectrum. I drive enough in real life, so there's nothing particularly appealing to me when it comes to realistic driving games. Horizon is the fun Forza series, the one that takes motorsports a little less seriously, so I decided to give it a shot. And I had a good time with this game. Even though it's not exactly my thing, I appreciate the vast variety of licensed vehicles, different types of races, and other activities on offer in Horizon 4. The game caters to a large audience. There's something for everybody, from high-speed street races to finding big jumps scattered throughout the map. It can be tailored to all skill levels thanks to its granular difficulty options. Play Horizon as a sim-style game or an arcade racer, or anywhere in between. Maybe the best aspect of the game is its environment. The UK setting is gorgeous in all 4 seasons. Between the seasons, various weather conditions, and a day-night cycle, the game has a huge amount of visual variety. While certain competitive events can get very intense, just driving around the world in between races is wonderfully relaxing, and I certainly can't say the same about driving in real life. Roguelikes are the current crutch of the indie game scene, the way pixel platformers used to be. There are a lot of them, and it can be difficult to find the truly exceptional games in all the noise. I am sick to death of roguelikes, but Dead Cells is so good that I enjoyed it despite my fatigue of the genre. Dead Cells' influences are clearly visible. The punishing combat, dodge roll, and the name are from Dark Souls. The minimap and permanent upgrades that allow you to access new areas are straight out of Metroid. The slow progress toward unlocking new weapons and abilities is reminiscent of a whole bunch of other roguelikes. Dead Cells doesn't exactly bring a whole lot of original ideas to the fore. It's a smart combination of its inspirations. What separates Dead Cells from the crowd of indie roguelikes is how well those ideas are implemented. This game is several notches above the usual fare. Most essentially, it feels great to play. Moving around stages is a pleasure. Combat is fast and fluid, and the lovely pixel art is highly readable. Dead Cells features a huge variety of weapons and special items, allowing for many types of character builds. It's particularly gratifying when you stumble onto a complementary combination. Like most roguelikes, Dead Cells features a little too much repetition, grinding, and reliance on random chance, but it's one of the best examples of the genre, despite not entirely overcoming those pitfalls. Into the Breach is a stellar turn-based tactics game where you take control of giant city-sized robots to defend the last remnants of humanity from giant city-sized bugs. It's a fun premise. I like to pretend that it's an unofficial Pacific Rim game, and somewhere just off screen Idris Elba is shouting about canceling the apocalypse. Battles take place on 8x8 grids. Your team of 3 mechs take on larger groups of enemies, which are constantly getting reinforcements. The odds are very much against you. You have to protect not only your team of mechs, but also civilian cities, power plants, and other targets of interest. But Into the Breach does throw players a bone. You get to see what the enemy is going to attack next turn, which gives you a chance to thwart them. The challenge is managing all these threats. You have more to lose than the enemy. Your mechs recover fully between each mission, but damage to the power grid carries over, and if you don't do a good enough job protecting it, that's game over. This is a run-based game. After total victory or defeat, you'll start again on a new timeline. Eventually, you'll be able to unlock new teams of mechs, new pilots, and new weapons and abilities, all of which substantially change your tactical options. It's absolutely critical that you learn to use your mech's powers in tandem. You can't brute force your way through. On harder difficulties, you need to get the most out of every turn just to survive. Every move you make needs to accomplish multiple things. It's almost more of a puzzle game than a strategy war game. But when you figure out how to maximize your turn, when you solve those puzzles, it feels amazing. If you got death threats from angry customers over a video game you made, what would you do? I know I wouldn't spend the next 2 years of my life working to improve the game to give the people what they want, but that's exactly what Sean Murray and the team at Hello Games have done. Each year since launch has seen marked improvements and additions to No Man's Sky in the form of free updates. 2018 brought us the biggest update yet. Dubbed No Man's Sky Next, proper multiplayer was finally added to the game, along with a host of other features. It's incredibly admirable that Hello Games have overcome the launch backlash and come out on the other side with a game that's arguably above and beyond what was initially promised. In an industry where the biggest companies are constantly concocting ways of extracting more money from players with a minimum of effort, Hello Games have done the opposite, and that's worth celebrating, no matter how you feel about the game itself. Parkitect is the roller coaster tycoon modernization I've been waiting for. I tried Planet Coaster, I watched the slow-motion train wreck that was Roller Coaster Tycoon World, all the while hoping somebody would be able to recapture the spirit of those original games. Parkitect is definitely the closest any game has come to Chris Sawyer's sublime park builder since the original trilogy. If you've played any of the first 3 RCT games, then you know pretty much exactly what this is. It's a theme park builder with a management sim core. Parkitect seems to maintain Roller Coaster Tycoon's delicate balance between simulation, management, and creative toolbox. While much of the way the game works is based directly on the older series, it's been smartly updated with new systems and interface design. Staff management is more in-depth, but it isn't so involved as to be tedious. And the whole thing seems a little bit harder than I remember Roller Coaster Tycoon being. I've had a little trouble turning a profit so far, but I'm relishing the challenge there. I haven't been able to fully evaluate this game yet, but it's looking like Parkitect is to Roller Coaster Tycoon what Cities Skylines is to SimCity, and that would be an incredible thing. I don't have a ton to say about this game. I'm not a huge Smash fan, I don't play fighting games. I come to this series because it's an incredible celebration of classic and modern games. The sheer amount of characters, stages, and music tracks from different franchises is just staggering, and it's really fun to see it all mixed together. I appreciate the details, the clever references to the original games. I play Smash extremely casually, always have, and consequently, I'm absolutely terrible. But I'm having fun with it. I've watched a few videos on basic techniques, and I'm actually looking forward to getting a little better at the basics, instead of just fumbling around as I have with all the past games. Now, here are my top 5 favorite games of 2018. Subnautica is a survival crafting game set on an oceanic alien world. You play the lone survivor of a ship that crash lands there. Using a combination of the planet's natural resources and scavenged technology from the crash, you must survive and escape the planet. Subnautica features all the requisite hunger, thirst, and health meters of a typical survival game, but the most immediate limitation to your progress is oxygen. You'll have to return to the surface or another source of oxygen periodically. This, along with other factors, organically gates the deeper, more exotic parts of the ocean until you are able to upgrade your equipment. It's an incredibly satisfying loop for those who enjoy exploration. Each upgrade means you can venture a little farther, a little deeper into the mysterious sea. Although there are dangerous creatures, there's not really any combat, in contrast to many survival games. There's a robust base building mechanic, and a variety of vehicles you can construct, allowing you to go farther, deeper, and accomplish more on each expedition. The mid and late game feel totally different from the early game, when you're bound to a small escape pod, only able to go so far and so deep. There are a great variety of underwater locales, from the comforting shallows to terrifying murky depths. These biomes feel genuinely alien, not unlike the deeper portions of our own ocean. It's vast and indifferent to your presence. You are always aware that you don't belong there. At times, it feels like a horror game. The deeper, darker parts of the ocean are incredibly unsettling to explore. There are terrors that lurk in the deep, and they can surprise you if you're not careful. Subnautica's ocean never feels totally welcoming. No matter what upgrades you have, you're always vulnerable, in danger of attack, running out of power, food, or fresh water. The game doesn't hold your hand with progression or exploration. Smart preparation is on you. Every advance, every discovery, everything you craft or build is earned. I also enjoyed Subnautica for its science fiction trappings. The technology has a cool, clean look to it. The bases and vehicles you build have a nice tactile feel. There's not a deeply involved story, but there are reasons for everything that happens in Subnautica, and those events contextualize the game in really compelling ways. You don't have to learn about the lore if you don't want to, but it very much enriched the experience for me. 2017 was a great year for video games, so it's not all that surprising that a game in a cult genre got overlooked, but it is still a huge shame. Prey Mooncrash is DLC, not a full game, but this is my list, and I get to arbitrarily decide what qualifies for it. Mooncrash is great. It's not on my list because I feel that Prey needs more love, although it does. Normally I wouldn't consider DLC for Game of the Year, no matter how much I enjoyed it, but Mooncrash feels more mechanically substantial, like it could have been a standalone expansion or spin-off. Mooncrash takes the immersive sim mechanics of the base game and combines them with ideas from the roguelike genre. The moment-to-moment gameplay is very much like Prey, but the structure around that is run-based. Mooncrash takes place inside a simulation. You'll take control of 5 playable characters, each with unique stats, abilities, and upgrade trees that make them specially qualified for certain kinds of challenges. Your goal is to escape the ill-fated Pythias moonbase, and ultimately to get away with all 5 characters in a single run. This is a complicated problem because items only respawn on a per-run basis, so resources get more scarce on longer runs. Each character must use a different method of escape, and some are much more involved than others. On top of that, you have a limited amount of time before the simulation resets on its own. As time goes on, the simulation becomes more corrupt, which manifests as tougher enemies and more broken down systems, making parts of the base harder to access. Mooncrash's map is fixed rather than procedurally generated, but items, enemies, and environmental conditions are different each run. A route you take in one run might be cut off in the next. The ever-changing circumstances keep you from relying on dominant strategies. You must be able to plan ahead and think on your feet. Every other roguelike I've played is ultimately about getting good at combat through repetition, or maybe grinding for better stats or gear. But Mooncrash demands that you get good at solving problems and navigating the map. Sometimes that does mean combat, but just as often it's avoiding it. Knowledge of the game's non-combat mechanics, and of the map itself, are essential. More than killing enemies, you need to be good at managing your resources, and understanding what you can accomplish with what you have. Mooncrash is an amazing piece of design that I really didn't expect. Most DLC feels like cut content or bonus material from the main game, but Mooncrash is a truly transformative work, essential for anyone who enjoyed Prey or who wants to see a different take on the roguelike genre. More DLC should be like this. Hitman was number 2 on my list in 2016, and its sequel is more of the same in the best way possible. For a while it seemed like we might not get more Hitman. Developer IO Interactive was unceremoniously dropped by their former publisher Square Enix, and for a time, the future of the franchise was in doubt. But sometimes, good things do happen. IO was able to maintain their control of Hitman and continue the series as they see fit. So now we've been graced with Hitman 2, originally conceived as a Season 2 to the 2016 game. That's a good way to think about it. This is a bunch of new content for a formula that very much proved itself 2 years ago. Hitman has always been a fascinating, unique series that taps into the player's sense of mischief, sneaking around in places you're not meant to be, pretending to be people that you aren't, all in order to arrange creative, elaborate hits on despicable NPCs is just great fun. The 2016 game refined the core conceit of the series into a game that was broadly accessible, streamlining the controls, and building in a brilliant progression system that encourages players to dig deeper into each level and find new ways to accomplish their objectives. The biggest attraction with any new Hitman release is its selection of levels and the myriad opportunities they provide to eliminate your targets. While there's one less location than the previous game, presumably due to budget limitations, the overall lineup of levels is better than Hitman 2016. And each location in Hitman 2 is vast. They all feel bigger, some a lot bigger, than the previous game's levels. It's easy to get lost the first couple times through. I was surprised how I kept stumbling into new areas, even after several playthroughs of the same location. I love the open-ended nature of Hitman. If you want, you can just walk up to your target, shoot them, and escape through the ensuing gunfire. But it's far more fun to go after challenges, or even create self-imposed ones. The fact that the game lets you play how you want makes your choices more significant. The game actively encourages you to find more interesting and entertaining ways to take out your targets. Make it look like an accident. Accomplish your objectives without being spotted. Only kill your marks. Played like that, Hitman becomes a sort of action stealth puzzle game. Hitman's signature dark, deadpan humor makes a welcome return. It's great to see that IO latched onto what worked so well in the previous game and made it better, but didn't ruin it by taking things too far. The characters in the game are taking everything very seriously, but the folks at IO are winking and laughing right along with the rest of us. Hitman 2 is just a great time. 2018 was a great year to be a Spider-Man fan. You got Tom Holland's live-action Peter Parker in Avengers Infinity War, a whole multiverse of Spider-People in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and a spectacular video game from Insomniac. I'm not sure why it's taken so long for superhero games to get good. Batman Arkham Asylum came out almost 10 years ago, but there have been surprisingly few imitators, and, unless I missed something, none of them have been superhero games, until now. Spider-Man for PlayStation 4 takes a lot of what worked in the Arkham series and reinterprets it for Marvel's favorite son. This game is basically what I would have expected it to be. What surprised me is just how much I enjoyed it for what it was. It conjured a lot of similar emotions as when I first got into the character with the Sam Raimi movies years and years ago. Spider-Man's appeal lies in his relatability. He's not rich like Bruce Wayne, he's not cool and confident like Tony Stark, he's not a cultural icon like Captain America. He's a dorky kid with a tragic background. He might be able to effortlessly swing around New York fighting crime, but he can barely afford to live there. And Spider-Man PS4 does a great job of portraying both the superpowered hero and the financially strained young man with complicated relationships. The supporting cast of characters are terrifically realized and play a surprisingly large role in the plot, and even the gameplay. But it's still primarily Spider-Man's show, and you'll spend the majority of your time swinging around the city from story mission to story mission, engaging in side activities at your leisure. The web swinging is a ton of fun, and that makes moving around the world a joy rather than a chore. I've never been to real-life New York, but I felt a real sense of connection to this game's digital version of Manhattan as I swung around taking in landmarks, stopping crimes, and generally being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. While the story isn't groundbreaking, it feels like a quintessential Spider-Man story. There are just enough little twists to keep this take on the material fresh. Those familiar with Spider-Man lore will be able to predict where things are going much of the time, but the execution is utterly sincere, and that's so refreshing. I found myself really attached to these versions of Peter and his friends.
Love seeing you two together again. You always were my favorites.
I'm very excited about the potential for sequels because I want to see more from these characters, maybe even Insomniac's take on the Avengers and the broader Marvel universe. This game gives me confidence that this creative team could take on a broader scale story without losing sight of its beating heart. I love everything about Celeste. I could analytically break down each component, the mechanics, the level design, the story, the music, but ultimately it's all of those parts coming together so harmoniously that's the real magic of Celeste. More than anything else, I appreciate the attitude of this game. Celeste is a hard platformer for people who don't like hard platformers. And when I say hard, I mean exacting. It demands precision and persistence. You will die a lot. You will try and fail and try and fail and finally succeed. Normally that pushes me away from a game. I want a challenge, sure, but if a game is known for and marked by how punishing it is, I usually steer clear. In Celeste, the difficulty is absolutely core to the experience, but it isn't elitist about it. So many games and gaming communities use difficulty as a badge of honor, a way of gatekeeping, separating the real gamers from those who aren't good enough or dedicated enough. Celeste isn't interested in kicking you while you're down or telling you that you suck. The game opens with a friendly, encouraging message: you can do this. And more than any game I've ever played, it successfully conveys the theme of perseverance in the face of internal and external opposition. Celeste tells the story of an anxious girl named Madeline who sets out to climb the titular mountain. The ascent is hard and made more difficult by her own self-doubt, which literally manifests itself as a dark version of her. While scaling the mountain, you'll come across a cast of surprisingly well-realized characters, each with burdens of their own. The gameplay and story are wonderfully complementary, to the point that I have no idea what was conceived first. The plot advances gameplay, and the gameplay reinforces plot and theme. The themes of Celeste are universal, but intensely personal. Not everyone can identify with having a mental illness, but anyone who's lived long enough has certainly had bouts with doubt, anxiety, anger, and depression. I started playing Celeste in the last week before my wedding, and its themes were incredibly resonant for that moment in my life. It felt like my wife and I had been climbing our own mountain, grappling with our doubts and anxieties on the way to a summit that seemed unreachable at times. And that's life. Most of the time, it's a slog, a try-fail cycle that's stingy when it comes to handing out satisfaction. But everything good and worthwhile is a mountain that must be climbed. And so often the mountain is made larger in our minds. Celeste makes me recall the saying, "Be kind, everyone you meet is fighting their own battle." And I honestly can't think of a better lesson for our time than that. Celeste was the first new game I played in 2018, and it stuck with me the whole year. Ultimately, it's an incredibly hopeful, uplifting experience. The game earns it by genuinely exploring Madeline's inner struggles, and I earned it by persevering through 1,000 little failures and coming out on the other side having accomplished something I wasn't initially sure I could do. I play games for fun, to stimulate my mind, to express myself creatively, but when it comes to Celeste, I hope I can take its very real lessons about perseverance to heart. You can do this. So that's my list. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Now I'm looking forward to what the new year will bring us. It's shaping up to be an interesting one. Personally, I'm excited about Doom Eternal, Wargroove, The Outer Worlds, Metro Exodus, and Psychonauts 2. I'm also curious if Nintendo will have any surprises up their sleeve after a sort of lackluster 2018. We're likely going to get our first look at the next generation of consoles from Sony and Microsoft. That'll be fascinating. And I'm sure, like every year, there will be surprises. Hopefully, mostly good ones. Happy New Year.